And thank you so much for joining us in the studio. So my first question, and this is the main question that concerns the whole world today. How do you think why Donald Trump won the US election?
I think that's not a question that anybody is going to be able to answer today. I think there are a lot of different kinds of answers, and some of them are cultural, and they're to do with a feeling of some group of Americans, not the poorest Americans, but middle-class Americans, of having been forgotten. I think there is an answer that is partly to do with globalization and immigration and the perception of the loss of a certain kind of culture and set of traditions. I think that there is an economic answer, although I don't think that's the whole thing. And I think there's also an answer which is to do with Hillary Clinton and the kind of campaign that she ran, and the fact that for many Americans, and I say, rightly or wrongly, she became a symbol of a kind of corrupt establishment, and she paid a high price for that.
And media around the world were talking about the sure victory of Hillary, but now we can see the other results. How do you think, what is the role of media in all of this campaign and process?
I never believed in the sure result of Hillary, and if you look at everything I've written, I have never suggested that she would definitely win. I think actually if you're asking about the predictions, then I think there's a question about polling and opinion polls and how they work. Because this has been a problem now in a whole series of elections that have gone unexpectedly, including in several elections in Britain, not just the Brexit campaign, but prior to that. And there's a question whether something's gone wrong with opinion polling and why it doesn't work. I don't think it was entirely to do with the nature of the media or the prejudices of the media, because a lot of Republican pollsters, in other words, people who didn't necessarily want Hillary to win, also predicted that she would. So I think the answer may lie somewhere else. I think probably my guess is, and I'm not a pollster myself, my guess is that the explanation lies in who voted. And I'm guessing that a lot of people who don't normally vote and who might have told pollsters that they don't usually vote or they didn't know if they were going to vote, I think they did decide to vote. And I think that may be the explanation.
Don't you think that many people around the world just underestimated Donald Trump?
I didn't underestimate Donald Trump. The kind of language that he was using and the way in which he was appealing to people is familiar to me, both from history and from other countries. There was a very similar election in Poland a year ago. There was a similar election actually in the Czech Republic. We've seen some of that kind of language was used to help win the Brexit debate in Britain. So, I mean, what we're seeing is the appeal of a kind of identity politics and a sort of political language that is new and that people are unprepared for, but it's not completely unprecedented.
So do you see the Brexit and also Trump victory as maybe the symptoms of the same process?
I think that they're different because there were many people who voted for Brexit were not radical populists. There were all kinds of reasons to vote for it, but I think the phenomenon of radical populism, by which I mean populism, a form of politics which, like political movements in the past, offers a kind of magical thinking, promises without explaining where they come from. A political movement that runs against existing institutions and against democracy as we know it and against the way the world works is now clearly on the rise in a lot of countries, all over Europe, all over the Western world. Coincidentally, I was in the Philippines a few weeks ago, and there's a very similar, surprisingly similar, given how far away it is, surprisingly similar phenomenon there. I mean, look, you in Ukraine know a version of this kind of populism. You've had this in your elections before too. People who promise things, who run against the situation, but in the end turn out to be irresponsible. I mean, this is a phenomenon that you should recognize it.
How do you think? What are the negative and the positive sides of Trump victory for the U.S. and for the world in general?
So you're not asking me easy questions. That's also a long story that we're going to pick apart over the next few weeks. I think the most difficult part of the answer is the fact that we really don't know very much about him. He's never had political office before. He's never had military office. He isn't somebody whose judgment we know. We don't really know who he's going to appoint to important jobs. We don't know who's going to work for him. So it's very hard to make predictions. I mean, the one thing I hate to tell you that he's been very clear about, and actually for many years, not just in the last 2 years, is his dislike of American alliances and his admiration for dictatorships, and particularly Russian dictatorship. And he said this over and over again, and he's never backtracked on it, even though he's backtracked on a lot of other things that he said. So I think we have to assume this is now a part of his worldview, and I don't quite know how it's going to work with the American military and security establishment. But, part of his worldview is now, he does not see America as a world leader of democracy or as a country that promotes democracy or advocates democracy. And that is going to, if you begin to think about the ramifications of that, that changes almost everything. That changes NATO, that changes the World Trade Organization, all kinds of institutions that America is seen to lead, America may no longer lead. And I think it's very early days, but we have to begin to, in each country, work out what the ramifications are. It may mean, it may mean that Europe now needs to begin to think of itself as a leader, of a world leader, if it wants to remain as it is. It may mean that others need to, but frankly, right now, I don't see anything good about this. I don't see what positive comes from it. But maybe I'll feel differently in a few months.
And we know that he's very uncertain about a lot of points of his program. I mean, he don't have like a certain position about that, because about that or other thing, because he always changed the opinion. How do you think? But in the same time, he was elected for a very loud statements, a very certain and loud statements. Some kind like something like to build a wall between Mexico and the U.S. How do you think? What are the first steps? What are the first steps of his program? Maybe some of his moves that will be that we can expect from him right now.
I really don't want to predict anything. It's too volatile, the situation. He's an unpredictable person, as you said. He changes his mind all the time about what he thinks. I imagine he will have to deliver on the wall. He will have to build a wall. I imagine he will try to do some of the things he said he would do. He'll try to invest in infrastructure. He'll try to get more money to people. This is what he promised. I don't know how he's going to do it, but this is the most important thing that he's promised his voters. He's promised them he would make them richer, and he'll have to find a way to do it.
And do you know what are the ways in the U.S. government system somehow to limit the power of Trump as a president? Or just to control him?
I mean, one of the difficulties is that the Republicans have also won both the House and the Senate, and we have to assume that the Republican Party is now his party, and I don't see them wanting to restrain him. It may be that because their agenda is slightly different, they try and push him in certain ways. The Supreme Court should be able to act against him, but that's also complicated because the Supreme Court right now is divided ideologically. I mean, it may be that once a ninth member is opposed, the Supreme Court, once the judges are in place, then they can't be revoked. So yes, the Supreme Court will have ways of standing up to him. All depends what he tries to do. I mean, if he stays within the Constitution and then he has then there may be no need to stand up to him. I really think it's too early now to predict what will happen. Theoretically, there are a lot of checks and balances. There are conflict of interest laws. There are all kinds of things in place that are meant to restrain presidents. But we will now see if they work.
And we've already heard some first reactions from from European countries about this victory, and we've heard some words from European leaders about no matter what the result is, the cooperation will continue. But we know that this is like very diplomatic speech. How do you think? What is the future of this cooperation between Europe and the US?
Look, the one thing he has been very consistent about not just in this campaign, but for 15 years, is his dislike of American alliances. And they're a waste of money, he has said repeatedly. And so we have to take that seriously, or at least expect that he may try and pull out of them or change them. And I think that just goes without saying, that he may try and do that. Of course, European leaders aren't going to say anything in public negative. And yes, I think, of course, people will try and cooperate with him. And I think there will be efforts made to do so. But I don't know whether it will work.
And my last question, how do you think, what should Ukraine expect from this victory? How do you think maybe we can expect some kind of alliance between Trump and Putin, and maybe there will be some kind of change in sanction politics? How do you think?
I think it's possible, yes. I think there could be a change in sanction politics, and there could be a big change in America's relationship with Russia and also with other dictatorships.
In what way change? How do you think?
Look, this is not a man who is bothered by rule of law or interested in the problems and the success of democracy around the world. And so I imagine he has no objection to being closer to Putin, and he has no interest in defending, he said, Central Europe. I assume that means Eastern Europe and Ukraine. I didn't want to say anything that turns out to be wrong or inflammatory. So I don't want to go into details because I just don't know, and I'm very honest about that. But the expectation that America will continue to be what it was over the last couple of decades, I think, has to at least be under doubt.
Okay, and thank you so much for your comment about this.